Hello internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie, and in today's video we are back at Primate Isles, and that is of course our franchise mode zoo in Planet Zoo that is dedicated to the conservation and rehabilitation of all types of primates, from the smallest of monkeys to the largest of apes. And today we are building for a special creature, and it's one that we should have built for a little bit earlier on, because the first episode in this series was building for the ring-tailed and black and white ruffed lemurs. And the reason I didn't put the red ruffed lemur with them at the time is because in zoos and stuff they tend to keep them separate due to the red ruffed lemur being a little bit hostile towards the others. So when I dived back into this game after a little bit of a break recently, I decided to ease myself in with a slightly smaller enclosure. There was a nice little gap between some of the enclosures that we'd already built, so I thought let's fill it with a lovely little red ruffed lemur habitat, and that is what we're doing today. The first thing that I did when creating this habitat was to create a little offshoot of pathing so that our guests wouldn't be funneled too much on the main path. This main path is already pretty busy, so I just wanted to make a little offshoot to try and divert the traffic a little bit and make sure it's not too busy. After that I created a small kind of moat in front of this path, and this is going to be where our animals are able to drink and stuff, but it also prevents them getting too close to the glass and being able to climb out, because I'm going to add some wooden structures around the glass as well that, whilst they won't have a climb barrier at the top, we can turn the item to be non-climbable, but just for it to make sense in the real world, we're going to make sure that the animals can't really get to it that easily instead. Now what I'm doing is I'm just using the plain wooden logs to create a very simple barrier, nothing too fancy, and at the front near that moat we're using glass because I want to make a designated viewing gallery. You're only going to be able to see into this habitat from that specific point. And whilst this viewing gallery isn't going to be anything too fancy, I am going to dress it up a little bit. And to begin with, I'm using some log wall floor pieces to lay the foundation. I don't really want that path to be visible. I want this to be a separate platform that you kind of step onto. So I'm going to use the wooden log flooring pieces just to create that kind of texture that I want. And then after that, we're going to use various pieces of East Asian themed timber to line the glass barrier, to make sure that it doesn't just look like two massive pieces of glass. We're going to break it up a little bit with these wooden pieces. And I don't really like the barrier or the connecting piece, I guess, that is used on the glass barrier in game. It's this weird plasticky grey thing. It just doesn't look that good to me. So replacing it with wood or something just makes it look a lot nicer. I will also make sure to line both the top and bottom of the glass panels using these pieces of wood as well, just to make sure that there's no exposed edge of glass, because I think it looks a little bit ugly. So having this kind of frame to it really gives it a finished look, which is always quite nice. Something else that I wanted to do with this viewing gallery is create kind of a canopy area. I'm not entirely sure why, because it doesn't rain too much at this zoo, and to be fair, the canopy that I make won't really protect you from the rain at all. I just think it has a really nice finished look to it, having this kind of thing, and I guess given how hot this area is, the smallest bit of shade may help our guests as well, and I do mean small, because it's going to be pretty gappy as far as coverage goes. And to create it, I'm going to use some North African pieces of timber. So this is stuff that came in the North Africa pack. As far as I'm aware, that's what I think it came from. I just make sure to colour it a nice dark brown. It's not exactly the same as the wood we've already used, but it's getting there, so, you know. And to create this canopy, all I'm going to do is adjust the angle to a place that I'm happy with, and then copy and paste this beam along the length of our viewing gallery. Then after that I can use some supporting beams just to pop it up and make it look like it isn't floating and is in fact a working structure. And then once I was done with this basic build, I did think to myself that it could do with just something else, just a little bit more. So what I did was I filled the gaps in between each of the supporting posts with a bench. Not only does it just make this area look a bit more complete by having something else in there, but I also think it actually would be a lovely area to sit down and watch the animals playing about in their climbing frames and stuff. I just think it'd be really nice as a guest to have a bench here. And of course, wherever we have benches, I always like to pop a couple bins as well, because you might sit down and have a little snacky snack, so you need to be able to get rid of the wrapper and stuff, and we don't want any litter in our zoo. Then of course it was time to make sure that our guests actually knew what the animals they're looking at are, and to do that we're going to place our education boards, and for a change I actually used some of the Zoopedia frames. I don't use these very often, but after using them in my Christmas themed zoo recently, I realised they are actually really nice. So I've taken the opportunity to pop one on the flat surface either end of the viewing gallery. You can see the capybaras on the screen there, but that is literally just to test how the screen fit on the wall. When I was playing about putting it on the actual glass, I decided against that because I think these frames actually look a lot nicer, and they just add a little bit more theming to the zoo and just, I don't know, make it seem a bit more real. And as a finishing touch for signage for our red lemur habitat, I'm going to go over to the signs and then look for the animals, and then we're going to go for the lemur silhouette and turn it to a nice deep red. And then just going to place that on the wall of the barrier right next to the education board. I think it looks quite nice and gives you an idea of what you're about to see. Now it's time to dive inside of the habitat and make sure that our animals have something to keep them happy. Around the perimeter of the water area, I want to place a bunch of moss covered rocks to try and blend out the fairly stark ending to this water area and make it seem a little bit more natural, and it'll add a bit of elevation as well. Having different heights and different textures, different colours, just varying everything always makes things look a lot more interesting. So having these various size of rocks and textures right at the front is really going to help to try and keep it a bit more interesting. I'm also creating a slightly shallower area in the water just so that they can come up and have a drink a bit easier without risking falling into this kind of moat. So I'd feel a bit bad about that if that were to happen. And then it's time to place a bunch of enrichment items, including of course the rubber duck, because who doesn't love the rubber duck? And I'm going to go ahead and place the food enrichment items first, because I always, well not always, but it happens quite a lot that I forget about those massive foraging pits or the mud baths. These really big things that take up quite a lot of space. I often forget about them and don't bear them in mind when placing my foliage and stuff, and then they're inaccessible. So by placing them first, I'll be able to work around them, which is a lot better. I'm not going to get too fancy by building my own climbing frames and stuff. Instead, I'm just going to use some from the blueprints. And you may have noticed that the lemur climbing frame in particular is kind of floating. The logs don't all enter the ground at the same point. There are some that are just levitating. In order to mask that, I'm going to use some massive boulders and stuff and just make a rocky outcrop out there and make it look as if though the climbing frame has actually been built to the heights of the rocks that are already in place. Then after that, it is a matter of making this place look like a wonderful little jungle for our red ruffed lemurs. I'm going to try to refrain from using too many trees. It's just going to be a small handful, and the ones that we do are going to be very twiggy, if you know what I mean. They're going to be very full, and they're not going to have too many long, thick branches the animals will be able to climb along and then jump out of the habitat. Instead, they're going to be like glorified bushes, aside from a couple centerpiece trees that are going to be quite nice and tall and more directed towards the front, well not the front, towards the middle of the habitat, to try and make sure that there's nothing that the animals could jump to. For instance, if I were to put one in the back left corner, right in the corner, then an animal could potentially climb it and jump to a tree in the habitat behind it. Well, actually, there isn't a habitat behind it. It would jump to the tree at the outside of the Galapagos tortoise habitat and then be able to escape and run amok across the zoo, and that is of course not what we want. Then after that, it's a matter of using a bunch of various sized plants to again add variety and therefore quite a bit of interest, and just make this area look really packed and full of life so that our lemurs can just enjoy themselves and have a really chilled out life here. I hope they're happy, and I hope you're happy. This is of course the end of me talking for this video. We're about done, so at the end of this speed up time-lapse bit, you'll be able to see the cinematics, see how this habitat looks in the end, and of course you've got Floki's fact of the day to look forward to. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel to see more videos related to Planet Zoo and other games on the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later. you.